Hi, everyone. So we have started doing this call every week for the time being because there's a number of people out there who have questions for us. So we just wanted to make sure that we make ourselves available to everyone as much as possible. And on top of that, today we have something really, really exciting that we'd like to talk about. So let's go and try that right now, like this. Whoops. Give me a second.
Cool.
So hopefully that was pretty self-explanatory, but to summarize, we have started working on end-to-end encryption. For those of you who need a reminder, currently all data sent by Jitsi to the network is encrypted between you and Jitsi Video Bridge, and then from Jitsi Video Bridge and your peers. Because of how WebRTC and DTLS SRDP are built, however, that encryption has to be renegotiated between every two participants. So Video Bridge has to take packets out of one encryption context and put them in another, which also makes it potentially an opportunity for rogue service providers to have access to your data. Up until this point, our recommendation has been, if you don't trust your provider, make sure that you run your own instance. That's still the right thing to do. But we have also started work on this end-to-end encryption project that adds a second layer of encryption from within Jitsi Meet, from within the client, and that actually eliminates that possibility. So we're really, really excited about it. What you just saw is the use of that was a kind of a proof of concept demo. You would actually soon be able to do it on Meet Jitsi. Thank you for muting me. So the code that was the code that makes this is now deployed on Meet Jitsi, and we just need the functionality to trickle away from the dev versions of Chrome all the way to stable, and then you'd be able to do the demo by yourselves. The work that remains to be done is around exchanging keys, making sure that everyone understands who they're talking to. We're looking at using the double ratchet algorithm from Signal, potentially with Matrix's implementation, to make this work. So all of this is still ahead of us, but it is very, very exciting. And the demo that you just saw shows that this was the main hurdle up until this point that is now lifted. And many thanks to the Chrome Chromium and WebRTC teams for making this possible. All right. With that said, I am going to go through a brief batch of updates. It hasn't been that much stuff since last time, but we're going to go around the team and then open for questions from the floor. So, anyone from the team wants to add any update?
One thing to note is that last week we pushed a new stable release, which fixes most of the problems we found, mainly on Debian 10. And yeah, that's in a stable repo right now.
Nice.
Thanks, Damien.
From the infrastructure side, we were having issues with Jitsi dial-ins due to a couple of issues. One was some rate limiting that was happening on one of the backend services, which was actually fetching the conference pins. That should hopefully be resolved now. I haven't seen any throttling since we've upped those limits. The other thing was one of our load balancers that was in that mix was not being properly health checked or configured. So some of the calls were simply failing to connect. We've resolved that for now, and we'll continue monitoring.
One update that I wanted to add as well is that the Firefox compatibility work almost made it into last week's release of Jitsi. Unfortunately, we had a few last-minute issues, so we decided to disable it for now. But it's nearly done, folks. So it'll likely be there in the next release. So stay tuned on that as well. Anyone else from the team? Okay, in that case, I'm opening the microphone for questions from the floor. Community, anything we can help you with?
I saw Leo had a question in the chat about the timeline for the end-to-end encryption.
Okay, so that's a great question. I'd like to know the answer to that. But here's a few things. It won't happen before at least 6 weeks because the functionality that this requires is currently only in Chrome Canary. And in order for that, there are still changes trickling in, actually, even in Canary. So there's at least 6 weeks that we'd need in order to get that in. Whether we actually be done with our part by then is also not entirely clear. We're still looking at how exactly we're going to build this thing, how exactly we're going to incorporate the double ratchet algorithm. But our hope is that by, at the latest, at some point this summer, we should have it out and available for everyone. Hopefully even earlier, but let's see. Leo, hope this answers your question.
It does, thank you.
Sure.
Can I stream with Facebook?
No, unfortunately, that is not currently possible on Jitsi. However, you could use, if you had your own deployment and your own Jibris out there.
I believe you'd have to patch your own Jibris right now because some of the strings are hard-coded in the Jibri application.
Right. So if you had your own deployment and your own Jibris out there, that is a change that shouldn't be too hard to make.
And some people in the community have done it for the RTMP URLs, but Brian, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I don't know that if Facebook requires some other equivalent to the key like the YouTube one, so you might need some information that you can't just hard code, but is actually dynamic. So you'd have to do something for that too.
Well, it might require more tweaking, might require you to actually be a little bit hands-on on the Jibri, but I'm sure it's doable. Anyways, the point is there's no streamlined way of doing it. Yeah, there's no streamlined way of doing it. You could probably get it if you were motivated enough. And we are interested in having the choice within the app, but I don't think we'll have the time to work with it from within this team. So we're very interested in contributions there. So, hello. Will share YouTube video feature work on mobile? Same answer, actually. It shouldn't be that hard to get it to work because it's just a web view. Unfortunately, I don't think we'll be able to do it soon. In the meantime, what I just showed you does work on mobile because that wasn't sharing a video, it was sharing my screen plus audio. So that experience would have worked on mobile. Now, obviously, that's not entirely the same thing because that's screen grabbing with 5 frames per second. So as you saw, quality wasn't that great, or rather the frame rate wasn't that great. So there's compromises. Again, getting the YouTube live sharing instead, the YouTube sharing it shouldn't be horrible on mobile. So if anyone has cycles to dedicate to this, we're interested in PRs.
And to be fair, the screen sharing part of it could only happen from a desktop in your workaround. Is that correct?
Sure. So next question: how scalable is Jitsi? Is it possible to host 50,000 people? Well, depends on what you mean. It is absolutely possible to host 50,000 people on the same platform. We are hosting more than that on Meet Jitsi. If you were asking whether it's possible to have 50,000 in the same conference, then the answer to that would be no. That is a place where we would recommend that you use the live streaming feature that we're using right now, where you can indeed have 50,000 viewers, but not 50,000 active participants in the meeting. We currently limit meetings at Jitsi to 75 participants per meeting. Can users join without the camera if they just want to listen? So that is possible. So someone forgot to.
I muted them.
Right, someone forgot to mute. Sorry. So can users join without the camera if they wanted to just listen? Let me paste this here. There is a way to do that right now, but it is not particularly friendly. You'd have to send people a special URL. Come on now. There it is. So you're going to.
Is that different than where most people here are, where they're not sharing their camera, but they are listening?
So I think the question was, is it possible to join without video rather than
oh, I see.
Join and then turn off your video? So, which obviously, yes, you can join and turn off your video. You can even start with your video muted. Here's an example of how to construct the link that lets you do that. I've pasted that in the chat. We are actually working on adding a pre-meeting join screen where you'd be able to toggle that through user interface. So that's a few weeks out, but that would give you the ability to do it there too. The next question you have here is, do you have any plans to make a choice of screen share where you only show some part of the screen? We currently support the ability to share, or rather I should say WebRTC currently supports the ability to share your entire screen, to share a single app, or to share a tab within your browser. I don't believe there are plans to add region sharing possible with WebRTC. Yeah, that was the last question in the chat. Does anyone have any other questions they would like to ask live?
There was the RTMP-S question, which is basically the same answer as Facebook, which is Jibri could support it because FFmpeg can support it. It's just a question of getting Jibri to get the correct URLs involved. So hopefully that answers.
Definitely, thank you. That's good enough.
All right.
Someone asked, how big is the team?
Well, it depends on what you consider part of the team. There's hundreds of people that have contributed to Jitsi. There's currently about 30 within 8x8 that work on meetings-related matters exclusively. All right, there's way more questions coming in now. Technical question: can you run multiple JVBs behind the same NAT with different ports, or does JVB always have to run on 10,000? You can run multiple JVBs behind the same IP address. JVB has a stun discoverer that lets it discover its own address. I'm actually now having a doubt whether it also reads its port from there. Boris, do you want to comment on this?
It only reads the IP address from stun and uses the configured port. So running on a different port is possible even with stun.
Okay, great. But you'd have to tweak your platform to do that. So obviously you'd have to have something that knows how to route the incoming traffic to the bridges sitting behind the NAT. Thank you, Boris. No question, but just wanted to give a sincere thank you to all of the maintainers and contributions of this project. Can't say enough how clutch this project has been, critical maybe, in these weird times. Love the experience and I'm delighted by the development direction. Thank you so much. This is very kind of you. Really appreciate the kind words. George, do you plan to expand Jitsi to include more functions that would expand and benefit a teacher? Student dynamic. We don't know. So we're working closely with some platforms out there. Specifically, we have a very good relationship with WooSchool. We're trying to answer their questions as much as possible and satisfy their demands. We would like to remind that it's possible to embed Jitsi in an iframe within existing platforms. People have done that for Moodle. WooSchool have done that. So if you want to add other functionality on top of it, that's a good way to go. We're also considering support for features such as breakout rooms, which I know is currently something that some people use in such environments. So we might work on that as well. There's only so much we can do, however, at a time. So right now we are focusing a lot of effort on end-to-end encryption, on scaling our bridges, and everything else is kind of secondary at this point. I'm being told that I'm missing some questions, so team, please interrupt me if you want to go back to some of them. I am moving on. Did anyone want to?
There's one question about instance size. I'm not familiar specifically with the platforms you guys are the questions asking. 4 virtual CPUs and 8 gig of RAM is a totally acceptable size for a JVB, but you will need many more than just one if you're trying to host, the Meet Jitsi scale of users. So you're just going to have to kind of tune it based on the sorts of users you have, because for instance, a 2-person conference is a lot more heavy or a lot less heavy than a 50-person conference. So it's really going to also depend on your user base.
There was also the question in the chat, where do you meet in the physical world? And these days, the short answer is especially these days, we don't. But and I'd say the majority of the team is in the Austin area, Austin, Texas. But we're all over the place, and we do all our meetings over Jitsi as well. Basically, people don't typically go into physical offices very often. And we've got a good spread of time zones too. So some of us are in the US, some of us in Europe.
Thanks, Jordan, for taking. Thanks, Jonathan, for taking this one. I'm going to continue with the next one that I see. Oh, that was the one that actually Aaron answered. Let's see.
Someone asked about JVB2 updates in general.
I'm assuming this is asking about the main differences between JVB2 from 1. I think a few people have asked about that. And I've been meaning to do a post. I did one thing when we did the merge to master. So in terms of features, JVB2 doesn't have a lot of differences. It was really, there's some DTLS 1.2 support, which wasn't in JVB1. That's probably the main thing. We also deprecated a couple things like we only support our RTCP MUX and only support Max Bundle now. We only do the single port mode. But the big thing was just that we did basically a rewrite of all the code and all the underlying stuff. So it was largely about refactoring some things for some performance, and then also just like momentum moving forward, making it easier for us to implement the new features and do all the stuff we're trying to do. We had a lot of improvements also around the stats that we gather. So we have a lot more data that we can monitor for performance and stuff like that. We're tracking latency of packets and jitter of packets through the box, that sort of stuff. So a lot of the changes weren't the most kind of user facing. The bridge is hopefully plays a very silent role anyway, and as long as you don't see any issues with the media, then it's doing its job. So hopefully that answers it a bit.
The question about 50,000 users, you're definitely going to want to live stream that and only have maybe your DJ involved with the actual meeting. We're definitely not looking to target 50,000 participants in a conference, even just consumers.
Yeah, I think I actually went over this one, but there's one about last N, which I'm not sure I understand. Last N.
Oh, sorry, I saw that one too. I can respond to that. So I saw some people. We had a bug that we'd found in last N and JV2 that was fixed as of a few weeks ago. We still have not been exploring last N much in our own use, largely because we would probably pick a pretty big number, and the stats that we see on things like Meet Jitsi, a lot of conferences don't actually have more than, say, 10 people with video turned on. So we've not really played much with enabling last N, but we're kind of keeping it in mind as we're thinking about scale and stuff like that. And we might be looking at it, enabling it in between the bridges with Octo and stuff at some point, but it should be working now.
Taking Alejandro's question about a table that shows server spec versus a maximum number of simultaneous users. Unfortunately, there's a lot of variables there. It's one of them is obviously server specs, but beside that, there's the size distribution of conferences. If you have a few large conferences, that usually takes a lot more resources than if you have a bunch of small ones. What browsers your users are using. Currently, Firefox has no simulcast on Meet, which means that it is much heavier, and this also depends on size of conference. This one should change soon. Whether you have turn servers configured or not, and there's other variables as well, so it's really hard to give a recommendation on this. On the machines we run, we see up to a few hundred participants per bridge. One way that is more accurate is to look at packet rate or bit rate, and we could give you some numbers there, but how the packet rate that a server can handle translates to a number of participants is again hard to say.
And to add on that a little bit, the reason we don't necessarily know ourselves is because we don't run, it all depends on how you run the service too. So we deliver, the Docker images, and then you can install the Debian and have it all sort of run on one server, but that's not how we run it day to day. We have, the bridges are on dedicated computers, the Prosody servers are on dedicated computers, Jibri, Jitsi, all these things are spread out on different types of computers. So depending on the types of loads they see, and we change the specs of the servers that we run all the time based on usage patterns and everything. So we just haven't ever dedicated resources to saying, benchmarking and saying, if you're running it all on one box, this is the size box you need because of everything in the Boris said too. So Boris, what everything Boris said is just right. And then for us, we don't run the same deploy as what somebody may use for just having a few conferences of 20 people or so.
And to add on to that, the main way you would know to add more servers has to do with either, as Boris was saying, the packet count, packet rate through your servers, or the system load itself. And our main recommendation is to not let the system load go too much above the number of virtual CPUs you have, but that's just some guidelines. It's not like that's a hard and fast rule.
Yes, and just to to emphasize the conference size distribution, we have two different services we run, the Meet, Jitsi 1, and 8x8, and we do see different patterns between the two. So it's impossible to tell what it's going to look like for your service.
Okay, a couple more questions here. In the case of YouTube live streaming, how is data distributed? That's easy. We just send a single stream. Oh, the YouTube video sharing. Oh, I'm sorry. Then in that case, just everyone loads the YouTube link locally and plays it locally. Thank you, Aaron, for correcting me. So there was a question about a paid option. So as you all know, most of the Jitsi team is employed by 8x8. And there is an 8x8 video platform at 8x8.vc, which does offer a paid subscription, and we'll be announcing more details about that tomorrow. So we're quite excited about that as well. There is no paid version of Meet Jitsi itself. It's by design an anonymous service, so kind of doesn't really fit a paid model there. Then what was the next one? Anyone from the team wants to cover some other questions here?
So Paul mentioned as an FYI that they started building a website for the Jitsi docs using DocuSource. And I would suggest on that, if you've done so, to go ahead and advertise that on our community forum. Is it community.jitsi.org?
Yeah.
Yes. And maybe reach out. I'll tell Sol, because somebody else on the team, Sol, was talking about DocuSource and that sort of thing. So maybe something we want to coordinate with them so that it gets bigger exposure, and maybe some people on the team can help to adopt it too. But sounds good.
There's an open question about the leader or teacher in a meeting. We don't make a distinction between any user in a meeting on Meet Jitsi, so there is no concept of an organizer or leader. Everybody in the conference has the same powers.
Leonard's question about how turn servers affect the load on JDBs. My point is, if you have no turn servers, some of your peer-to-peer participants will fail to establish a direct connection, which means that their traffic will go through the bridges. While if you have turn servers, more of them will have a direct connection, or all.
The question on trolls is an interesting one. We don't specifically have features that are trying to fight against trolls, because we had designed this originally thinking that we're all adults here trying to just be part of a conference. I think that there are ways that you could build anti-troll things on top of Jitsi, but as it stands, Emil, if you want to talk more about that.
Yeah, so you can absolutely deploy your own instance with additional authentication on top of it using XMPP. If you're interested in being able to authenticate and identify all people joining, all conferences being created, you should use that. Obviously, access to the web server is also controlled by the deployers, so you can even authenticate that way people who are joining. We also have JWT authentication options. So all of that is customizable on your own deployments. That's why we taught flexibility for Jitsi. Sorry, Aaron, is there something like that?
Oh, I was just going to say that the thing we do with the everyone is a moderator is also an option in your own deployment, so that you could set it up so that not everyone could kick out everyone.
Right. Okay. Sounds like things are calming down. We do have time for a few more questions. Are there any plans to fix the 30 frames per second screen sharing feature? No, I don't believe so. So screen sharing in conferences is meant for things like that. Well, the massive use case is sharing slides. Screen resolutions are in general noticeably larger than just video resolutions, and sorry, I got distracted. So you like the requirements for send these things in 30 frames per second is going to be rather heavy. An easy way that you could do that and work around this problem is to use a virtual camera device that grabs your screen and makes it available as a webcam on your computer, in which case we will treat it as a webcam and we will be sending it 30 frames per second. So that's a, that's a good way you could work around this.
I see one question about the Firefox simulcast support. So the answer there is, is Firefox simulcast support something that's been merged, or is it waiting for upstream Firefox changes? The answer there is no to both of those, which is to say it's not yet been merged, but it's ready to be merged. There is one Firefox bug we discovered in Firefox 75, which causes some issues with simulcast, but we've got to work around for that. And it also looks like they should have that fixed relatively soon because it's a regression. But basically, it's just waiting on us getting all the everything, all the last T's crossed and I's dotted, and getting everything merged in. So that should be this week without needing any Firefox upstream support. There's some stuff coming pending in Firefox which will make this work better. They're changing to their retransmission and bandwidth estimation to be more like Chrome, which, I mean, we support Firefox modes, but they're less. They don't work as well as Chrome, so they're changing to be more like Chrome's. So that should also help going forward. But that's just making it work better, not necessary for it to work at all.
There was a mention to a version with a lobby room. Question from Jay, which are your views in development? Yeah, we are currently working on this. It's probably going to be at least a couple weeks out, but we're working on it hard. Well, it will be a lobby room, right? People will have to wait before they are let into the room. If that option is turned on, they will get the option to introduce themselves with a name, and it'll be up to the people in the room to decide whether they'll let them or not. Again, we're trying to observe a balance between multiple things, including this still has to work for anonymous participation. It has to cover as many use cases as possible. There are likely going to be cases that would benefit from it working slightly differently. And I'm sure there will be a way to work that out if you're running your own installation. Sounded like there was a question around that. Okay, no question then. Anything else? All right. So thank you everyone for joining. And see you again next week.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.